Tēnā koutou katoa. It's great to see you here tonight, and I want to start off with a quote. This was written on May 29th, so around about 28 days ago, but also 150 years ago. This is the most miserable day of my existence. We had to turn out last night at 10 o'clock, and the water rose so fast that we could not get anything away but our blankets. Had to wade to the side of the range, up to our middles in water. We tied the powder and guns and a few other things up to the ridgepole, afraid to carry them away in case of getting them wet. The night was very dark, and before we reached the hill, I got up to my arms in water. I thought I should never get across, but we reached the land safe, about a quarter of a mile distant. Had to walk up and down all night, the rain still pouring down. If this night does not kill us, we shall never die. Daylight broke upon us, each looking for the other, and wondering that we are all alive. Got a fire this morning, kept it going all day, but we could not get back to our tent, as there is 10 feet of water to cross. So we shall have another night, which I hope will be fine, or we will perish. Barrington and his companions did an epic journey. This is a picture of Barrington there in one of his better moments. They started in December at the head of Lake Wakatipu, near Glenorchy, and they headed out looking for gold. And you can just make out on that map up there, that's the coast. So as you can see, I don't want to go into the valleys and the details of what they did, but they traversed some of the greatest tiger country in New Zealand. And what did we get out of that? Well, a number of Barrington's journal entries speak of their misery and constant struggle with the cold and lack of food. They survived with little equipment, apart from blankets, guns, and a dog. And this tells a tale of courage and resourcefulness, but also a fair bit of luck. The stuff of legend and formative for a lot of our Kiwi culture. The weather and the terrain that Barrington's group crossed almost exactly 150 years ago, it was 1864, June 13th, when they finally got back to Glenorchy. That countryside, that terrain, that bush is still there, and that weather is also still there. But much has changed in the last 150 years. And that's the topic for tonight's presentation. If Barrington's group had had access to modern technology and to the kinds of things we have access to today, what would the consequences have been? I'm going to leave that question hanging, and I'm going to come back to it at the end of the talk. For me personally, outdoor recreation and outdoor education has been a passion for most of my life. Often I love it, but sometimes I hate it. It can be uncomfortable, it can be scary, it can be rewarding, and it can be inspiring. I view this talk here as a bit of an opportunity to take you for a bit of a journey, a bit of a wander through some of the interesting things that have come about in the last 150 years. Introduce you to some new ideas about safety, some new technologies. But if you are here with the hope that I'm going to go into great detail about some of the technologies that are available to us, I'm going to disappoint you. That's not the focus of this talk. The focus of this talk is to talk about safety in a broad kind of context, and then to go into some of the technologies that are available to us, but also to look at some of the things that can go wrong, and maybe finish with some of the reasons why we should go into the outdoors and some of the trends we see. This talk was great for me. it gave me the opportunity to go and talk with the New Zealand Mountain Safety Council. Many of you will have the outdoor safety code in front of you. New Zealand Land Search and Rescue, and also to a couple of trampers who shared their story with me. And I'm going to use their story as a bit of a case study to kind of highlight what I'm talking about. So this talk's topic is what to do if you were lost in the outdoors. But in order to address this topic properly, we need to go back to before you went into the outdoors. The New Zealand Mountain Safety Council put together the Outdoor Safety Code. And it's got 5 fairly basic points. It's not rocket science. But what we find is, unlike Bear Grylls, who survives by eating the liver of a poisonous frog that he finds in the jungle, or creates a rope out of some leaves that he finds, it's not those fancy things that keep us alive. It's the basic stuff. It's the non-glamorous. And this is why this list is so powerful. It's those 5 points. And I'm going to go through them briefly. First of all, planning your trip. Things that you should think about beforehand. What could you find out? There's lots of resources, both online or by calling people, talking to people who've done the trip before. Lots of ways to find out whether it's a good trip for you. And maybe if there's a bit of a sting in the tail there. Barrington didn't have access to this stuff. Barrington went out looking for gold. Barrington and his companions took, like I said, some blankets, some guns, and a dog. The second point, telling someone. Who knows where you're going and what you've done? Adventure Smart is a website that allows you to tell lots of people about where you're going and gives them little reminder emails and things like that. That's a great resource for us today. But just writing down something for somebody can be really helpful. Barrington, I'm sure, would have told the odd gold miner and the people at the farm at the head of Glenorchy what he was up to. Being aware of the weather. In the bottom corner here, you can see something that's almost, it looks a little bit like an evergreen tree in a strong wind. It's probably difficult for you to make out. However, this is the South Island here. The North Island there is completely covered with green and blue splotches that would make a German artist proud. What this represents, I'll leave up to your psychologist, but this shows a weather system coming onto the country, and this is the predicted rain that we have. I accessed this morning. The image in the background is a lovely trip that I did with my daughter when we experienced a half-hour, quite intense blizzard. You can't really see much of her there, but the whole time I was concerned that she was going to be okay as the snow and the wind kind of came in so suddenly and lashed us. And I kept asking her, how are you going? And she was like, I'm good. And I was like, really? Yep, good. And I started to wonder whether, A, whether she was really good, or B, whether she didn't actually understand fully what the word good meant. Knowing your limits. When I was a young lad, I used to go mountaineering a lot, and I was quite fit and strong, and I loved rock climbing. Alpine climbing was my favourite. And at one stage, I went and I ascended the Kaipo Wall, which is the largest rock face in New Zealand. And that's me there. I didn't do it alone, but my fitness and experience level were sufficient to allow me to survive that trip at least. It wasn't without its hazards, shall we say. I wouldn't consider doing that trip today. I've got a lot more experience now, and that might make me a little wiser, and I'm a lot less fit than I was then. Did Barrington have the experience and fitness to do their trip? What about that? Well, I was pretty impressed in that particular extract. The rain poured down and they lit a fire. That was quite impressive, because they would have had like a flint. They didn't have like those little fire lighters, you know, the little lucifer, those sorts of things. They didn't have a bottle of white spirits or meths to pour over the soggy logs. They would have used pretty intense bush skills to light that fire. They were hunting all the time. They didn't carry enough food for 6 months' supplies. Nobody could. But yet they survived. Barely as skeletons, is what they admitted. So I'd argue that potentially they did. Taking sufficient supplies with you. What have you got, apart from a gun, a blanket, and a dog? If we take the right things with us and think about that beforehand when we need them, then things are a lot easier for us when the situation turns nasty. I'm going to give you a story now, and some people shared their experience with me. I'm going to read it out loud because they gave me a wee transcript that I'm going to stick to. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to consider the safety code, that yellow sheet of paper that you've got there, as I tell you their story, and see if you can pick up on some of the learnings that they identified from this experience. This happened in March this year. 2 experienced trampers, a father and a daughter team, planned to go on a 2-day tramp in the Arthurs Pass area. The route that they took was characterised by some huts, or one hut, and a lot of difficult navigation. There wasn't really a track, but they were experienced. Before they left, they researched the trip and they talked with their friends and family about the various options they had for that weekend. They had some that if the weather was going to be really bad on the coast, they were going to head east, and if it was fine, they were going to do something else. And they discussed these with colleagues and their family. On the first day, they walked up this valley here to a hut. And it took them about 10 hours. It was a big day. And when they got to the hut, they didn't see the hut book. The next morning, they tidied the hut really well. This turned out to be a problem. On the second day, they then went over a saddle here and dropped down into the Rolleston River, which is this one here. And the route said they needed to stay on the true left, so facing down the river, staying on the left-hand side, reasonably high and sidling. Now, what happened was the cloud came down and it became very difficult for them to navigate, and they ended up dropping down to the river and they found the terrain very difficult. And at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they realised they weren't actually entirely sure where they were in the valley and where the track or the route continued. They thought about what they had to do, and if they'd tried to go back to the hut, a way they knew, it would have meant walking in the dark. The father had been benighted before and spent nights out without a hut, and he knew that it was going to be okay as long as they could find shelter as the weather deteriorated. So leaving enough daylight, they went and they looked, and they searched around, and under a large rock they found a small alcove, and with a bit of imagination they were able to get themselves both in there. And they used the time they had to kind of dig out the rocks and make a little wall. And that night, the rain came in quite strongly, and a drip ran down the rock and landed on the father's face. So he turned his raincoat hood down, and they didn't have a good night. But they were okay. The next morning, they woke up, and the weather was better. They could see fresh snow on the mountains around them, and they decided to see if they could find where they were. They looked at their compass and their map, And they made some educated guesses and they came up with a strategy. They then headed back up the stream, thinking they'd come too far down. After a little while, it became obvious that that was not the correct route. They returned back to their rock that they'd sheltered under and slept for an hour. After that hour, they thought for some more, and they decided that by descending, they could move out of the really bad weather and possibly find some shelter, also possibly find the route. They continued down, and to their great joy, they found the cairn, the pile of rocks that marked the route. With great relief, they started out on the route. The route wasn't well marked, and unfortunately, at a big scree slope, they descended back to the river by mistake, thinking that was the correct thing to do. Down the river, they came to a gorge. The gorge showed no way through. They found a cave under a rock, and you can see it here, just to the left. And they prepared that. They still had a cooker and some food. Unfortunately, one of their packs had fallen into the stream on the way down, and the contents had become soaked. So that night, they shared the one sleeping bag and took turns staying on the cold side of the bed. The next morning, they were woken by a helicopter. The helicopter was coming to look for them. They were already over a day or 24 hours late, overdue. The helicopter, unfortunately, just flew straight past them. But this is actually a search and rescue strategy. The helicopter flies up the valley, and by flying up the valley, it draws attention to itself, and everybody rushes out. So sure enough, a few minutes later, the helicopter scoured the valley carefully and came down and identified them. It worked out that they couldn't land in the gorge, but they went and lowered a winch and extracted these people. The search and rescue people were so excited to see them. Search and rescue are used to finding bodies, and they were just very delighted to see somebody alive and be part of that rescue. Now, these two trampers generously told me their story and gave me some pictures. And let's just go back to the safety code and evaluate how they did on that trip. Okay, first of all, they actually did a reasonable job of planning. They had the information with them that they needed. They knew where they needed to go and what to do. Second step, they did tell someone, they told a lot of people, but they left it at a discussion point, and that was one of the key problems with search and rescue. And that's what search and rescue criticised them for the most, was to say, you didn't actually write down something, so we didn't know where to go and look for you. And when we went to the Waimakariri coal hut, where they'd stayed the night, there was no entry in the hut book, they hadn't found it, and the hut was so clean, they assumed nobody had been there. That's not to say you should go out and leave your huts dirty, but it's an interesting point. I'm involved with an organisation called Leave No Trace, which is about travelling through the outdoors and being respectful of these places we go. And I've had a few debates with search and rescue who are, how are we ever going to find people if they take such care of leaving no trace? And so there's a bit of tension there that we work with. Being aware of the weather, they had a forecast, they knew what was going on, and they were prepared for it with their equipment. Number 4, they knew their limits. They were experienced trampers. They were fit and strong. And number 5, their feedback for themselves was that next time they would take a little tent fly, a little lightweight shelter that they could put up, an extra pack liner or a bivvy bag that you can put a sleeping bag in to keep dry, and they would take a personal locator beacon. We'll come to that soon. So, getting lost doesn't kill you. It's other things that do that. So, the real killers are hypothermia. We lose our body temperature through three basic mechanisms. The first one is conduction of our body warmth away from us through either sitting on cold things or having cold and wet clothing on us. That sucks the warmth out of us directly. Convection is where the wind blows past us and takes the warmth away from us. And finally, radiation. We actually radiate. That's why infrared technology works. We release heat through radiation. And you know those survival blankets, those silvery ones? If you put those around you, they're just like plastic. But it's the silver actually reflects things back to you. And in a private moment at home, you can make yourself a little foil hat, and you'll find out just how well that reflecting back heat thing makes you feel. So hypothermia. These two trampers, they did a pretty good job staving off hypothermia. In particular, they knew that if they looked for shelter early, they had a better chance of finding something good and surviving. They gave themselves enough time to find something that was marginal and make it better. They had good clothing and they wore it well. They took care of each other. Other killers: injury and drowning, speed, height, and water. We get injured oftentimes when we make bad decisions. A lot of these things come down to psychology. The two trampers that told me their story, they told me a lot about how they interacted with each other and how every decision they made, they questioned and they asked, is this the right thing to be doing now, at this time? They remained positive and they communicated frequently. Psychology and giving up hope is a major killer. Not necessarily directly, but indirectly. In the earlier last century, in the early 1900s, they made the interesting observation: when ships went down, it was often the old sailors who survived, rather than the young, perhaps fitter, stronger sailors. And they asked themselves why this might be the case. And they decided it was about resilience. The older sailors didn't give up. They stayed positive. They believed they would survive. The younger sailors, who had never experienced anything like that before and didn't have that kind of depth of resilience, oftentimes gave up. And that resulted in them dying much more quickly. So psychology and our attitude makes a big difference to our survival in the outdoors. If you are lost in the outdoors and you want to be found, Search and Rescue has some key messages for you. Stay where you are, make yourself obvious. So making yourself obvious involves using coloured materials. They'll search ridges and they'll search rivers. Those linear features. If you can make yourself obvious in those places, you'll get found much more quickly than if you're halfway up a hillside. Generally, the valleys are better because they're more sheltered. These things haven't really changed in 150 years. Barrington would have dealt with exactly the same things. The only reason that their group survived, as skeletons admittedly, is because they thought they were going to. And they probably were quite bloody-minded about it and thought, I'm not going to die here. And that's probably what got them through. But there's other things that have changed in the last 150 years. Technology. Okay, so first of all, let's see if I can work the technology here. Okay. Awesome, I'm going into the outdoors, I've got this phone, and this phone has got so many features. It's got a GPS in it, it's got a map app, and it's got my favourite. Let me just show you this one, see if I can get it right. Are you ready? Here it is. Oh yeah. Now, soggy rocks, it doesn't matter what it is, the cell phone will get me through. And in the worst case scenario, I can always call for help. It'll be there for me. So cell phones have revolutionised a lot of things. And in particular, I've noticed my own behaviour has changed with a cell phone. Instead of saying to somebody, look, I'm going to meet you on the corner of this street and this street at that time, and I'll wait there for half an hour, and if you don't find me there, then I'll be there. Nowadays, it's like I went to the Littleton Festival of Lights, and there were like, I don't know how many thousands of people there, and I had some friends, and I was like, I'll see you there. And I threw my phone in my pocket, and away we went, and that was the only planning I did. And then we texted and we found each other and it all worked beautifully. So my behaviour and my planning changed because I had this in my pocket. Going into the outdoors, that can also be the case, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in particular, there are some serious issues with relying heavily on cell phones as your safety. Firstly, there's obviously the coverage. Cell phone coverage in the outdoors in New Zealand is very patchy. O'Kane's Bay, which is just on Banks Peninsula, just over the hill there, has no cell phone reception. Or you have to walk up a particular hill to the high point to find that. Well, for my phone anyway, there may be others. In addition to that, if you leave your cell phone on or if it gets damp, any of those reasons, it's useless. It's no good as, it's worse than soggy toilet paper, okay? So it's important to think about the limitations of your devices. The mountain radio, I'm promoting the mountain radio here. I think mountain radios are fantastic. They're about the size of 2 pounds of butter, and they're quite heavy, and it takes you quite a while to put them up. 10-metre aerial in each direction, so a total of 20 metres. But you can make a call from anywhere in the country, and you can talk to somebody in the ambulance service. Paul White, who runs the Canterbury Mountain Radio Service, and they've got a little cubbyhole above Ballinger's Sport at Tower Junction. And Paul just got honoured in got the New Zealand Order of Merit for his work for the Canterbury Mountain Radio Service. And that was fantastic to hear. He's on the radio giving weather forecasts multiple times a day, and he's always available there. So even though it looks like a cell phone from the 1970s, it's actually got a fantastic kind of range and applicability, and it beats cell phones hands down for remote locations. What about a GPS? A GPS can tell you exactly where you are. It can also tell you exactly where you need to go. And even some of them have maps on them, and you can see those. They suffer from the same issues as cell phones, but they have another thing that the people at Lansar call death by waypoint. Death by waypoint involves, I know where I am here and I can see it on my GPS. I can put the coordinates of the place I want to go into here as well, and it will tell me exactly where I need to walk so that I can get there in a straight line. It does not take into account gorges, cliffs, mountain ranges, but it will tell me in a straight line exactly how to get to the point that I want to go to. So death by waypoint is for those people who follow, like blind slaves, their little GPS over the nearest cliff. GPSs have their place, but following them blindly is not helpful. Personal locator beacons. The top yellow image there shows a personal locator beacon. It's about the size of a cell phone, slightly bigger, and it's got a big friendly red button on it. That's the go home button. That means if you get that out and you set it up, you press on that button, a signal goes above the earth to a satellite, and it gets beamed back down to a central centre in Wellington, where search and rescue gets alerted, and the helicopter comes exactly to that location and picks you up. The person in search and rescue told me that they could basically take the search out of search and rescue these days because of personal locator beacons. So it's just and rescue, which I thought was a funny name, but yeah, go with that. Personal locator beacons, also modern ones, mean if you set them off, say you're injured, you can set them off, they'll come straight to you. If you set it off, some of the modern ones also have a signal that they continue to transmit, so you can go and find shelter. If you decide conditions have gotten worse and you need to move somewhere, you can go somewhere and hide somewhere else and be secure, and when they come in, they'll pick up that second signal and track you. There's organisations, a charity that's been set up to help make these more accessible to people. So you can rent one and take it with you and pop it in your pack. And the final thing there is a satellite messaging device. And there's a range of these devices, and my research is not comprehensive and my knowledge is not that deep. But I'll tell you a little bit about this orange device in the top right. I'm getting no commission for any sales for this device. What it does is you can take this little device with you into the outdoors, and every day you can push on the OK button. That will send a signal to a satellite and then say to your wife, partner, friends, email or phone, and it'll say, I'm okay and I'm at this location. And you can do that regularly, and people really like that because they can go, oh, they're there and they're fine. You can also enter beforehand, you can't change it while you're in the field, but you can enter a little text message that says, actually, I need help, you know, and press that. And they can then go and do whatever help plan that you have organised. All of this technology provides amazing opportunities, but it also provides some problems. Dangers and safety. So the dangers of safety involve things like our over-reliance on this technology means that sometimes we don't plan as we should. We take our wonderful device, whatever it may be, and we put it into our pocket, and there it is. It's done. We rely on this device for all sorts of different things to get us out of problems. Let me give you an example of a caver. Cavers rely on light. Without light, cavers can't get out of their caves. And at the end of the day, or however long they want to be underground, they would really like to come out. I'm a caver as well. So because cavers are so reliant on their light source, they don't just take a light source. They don't just take backup batteries. They take a further 2 other light sources. So they end up with 3 minimum light sources. If anything goes wrong with that light, they've got spare batteries, they've got backup light. If anything goes wrong with the second light, they've still got a 3rd light source. And I would argue if we are placing so much reliance on our technology that we disregard the basics and all sorts of other things, then we need to start thinking like a caver does, carrying like 3 of these and possibly a bunch of other things. So we can't afford to rely on them too much because they can fail. Batteries go flat, they get wet, a pack falls into a river. All these things can happen. Now the next point is risk homeo what's it? So Homeostasis. I'm a mammal. I maintain my body temperature. When I get cold, I shiver, and that makes me warm again. If I get hot, I sweat. That cools me down. As a mammal, I keep my body temperature within this nice, safe range. So what is risk homeostasis? Well, let me tell you an interesting study they did. In a German city, they got a taxi fleet. And this is back in the days when ABS brakes were brand new. And they fitted half the taxi fleet with ABS brakes. And they put little cameras in the cars and they tracked them. And after several months, they noticed that the taxi drivers who had the ABS brakes would tailgate more, would stop later, and generally drove far more aggressively than those without the ABS brakes in their vehicles. And that sent them going back to the kind of psychologists and going, what's going on here? And the best explanation that they could come up with was each of us has a little risk meter inside us. It's what we're comfortable with. And if we put on a bunch of safety equipment, we start to do riskier things because we feel safer. How does that apply to technology in the outdoors? Well, if I've got personal locator beacon, satellite messaging device, GPS, cell phone, I've got my lighter app, I've got all these things that are making me so much safer. Does that mean I'm going to do riskier things? Well, there's not any evidence from outdoors that says that, but there is evidence from lots of other areas in life that says that if we do have all these safety devices, we are more likely to make riskier decisions. So what's my advice? Well, dangers of safety. My advice is to pop the technology into your bag when you go, but to pretend it's not there, to try and consciously make decisions that you would have made even if you did not have that device with you at the time. Okay, a study in 2009 looked at search and rescue accidents. And the tallest one here, this dark blue one is search and rescue cases, and the light blue is ACC claims. So you can see off-field snow sports, massive ACC claims. Not too many search and rescue call-outs though. By contrast, tramping has the highest search and rescue, not a huge number of ACC claims though. And what's interesting about this is hunting. So proportionally, hunting has more search and rescue call-outs than tramping. There are fewer hunters, and it's because of their behaviour. Trampers often stick to tracks. Hunters almost invariably go off track looking for animals. So they tend to get lost more frequently. That kind of explains that. Search and rescue, or Landsar's operating costs for their budget is $2 million a year. Now, that's not all outdoor rescues. A lot of the search and rescue involves elderly, confused people in town and looking for them. But a proportion of it, not an insignificant proportion, involves helicopters flying into the backcountry looking for people who are lost. So the outdoors and going outdoors, getting lost, risking these dangers is not only unsafe, but it's also expensive. It costs us money, taxpayers. So wouldn't it be wiser and cleverer just not to go outdoors? Well, maybe people are getting cleverer. Let's look at this trend. So this is a graph of Federated Mountain Club's membership through to 2008. Look at the trend there. See this line? It goes down. Now, I anticipate that in the year 2025, there will be no people going into the outdoors anymore. And that is largely due to increase in people wising up to the cost, the dangers, and all these other things. Okay, so maybe it would be cleverer not to go into the outdoors at all. Would it matter if people didn't go anymore? And so I've turned my What If Wednesday around at this stage, hijacked the title, and taken us in a completely different direction. What if the outdoors was lost from us? There's been a really interesting couple of meta-analyses. That's a technical term for a study that looks at lots of other studies and tries to get kind of broad trends and bring them all together. And this research group did a meta-analysis of nature and people, and they decided that people are happier and healthier if they get a chance to be in nature. So they broke it down into lots of different categories. I'm going to talk about two. First of all, they found that our mental health improves when we are in natural settings. We get decreases in stress. We become more patient people. And our attention spans also increase. Children recover more rapidly from psychological stress when given opportunities to be in natural settings. Our physical health also improves. This is an interesting study that they mention, and that is prisoners whose cells look out on farmland went to the prison medical centre less frequently than those whose cells looked out on the courtyard. In a similar vein, I'm not sure how they set this experiment up, it sounds highly unethical, but they got a bunch of people and they stressed them out some way, shape or form. They made them feel very stressed, and then they gave them a view of a natural setting, or a view of a plasma screen showing a natural setting, or a brick wall. They found that the people who were exposed to the natural setting, their heart rates and their stress levels decreased the most rapidly. The plasma screen the next, and the brick wall people didn't do so well. They're probably still stressed today by that experience. There's also evidence that being in the outdoors encourages more physical activity. That's also a common topic in today's society. So it's a real pity that people aren't going outdoors as much, and these decreasing trends from the Federated Mountain Clubs just prove that. But hang on. Okay, so here we have Hawke's Bay Mountain Biking Club. Note the trend in the graph here. Where's that going? Okay, I see every New Zealander being involved in mountain biking at which point in time? Okay, or at least involved in the Hawke's Bay Mountain Biking Club. Society has changed, and it's changed the way we recreate. So there's fewer trips into the remote backcountry, but evidence is that there's more trips into the front country, the places that are more accessible to us. And this has been described as time deepening. Time deepening basically means you've got this much time, how can you get your nature fix and your outdoor fix in a shorter amount of time? So, shorter trips, less travel time, closer to home, oftentimes also more intense. So no longer are you going on a journey for maybe multiple weeks. Maybe you're going for a journey of an hour or two. And in that journey, you may be riding up into the Port Hills and on your mountain bike and going over some seriously sick terrain. Experiencing time deepening. And that has a lot to do with how society is structured these days. Like, generally, we have less time available to us. In society, we have more other options, and so people are choosing to prioritise their nature experiences. I went to an Alpine Club debate a couple of years ago, and the title of the debate was more or less that modern climbers are soft, latte-sipping, squidgy people who can't handle it. And if they were real climbers, they'd get into the high icy peaks of Mount Cook and show that they had some commitment. And a number of young climbers were there as part of that debate, and they presented an argument, because I went in, quite frankly, kind of going, yeah, numbers of mountaineers going to the high peaks are dropping off. But lots of people are going up to maybe Castle Hill, Kuratawhiri, up towards Arthur's Pass, and bouldering on these smaller rocks. I mean, do they just not have the guts to go on the big mountains? Are they just not up for it? Are they worried that the distance to the nearest coffee outlet is getting critical? What is it that's going on? And I heard some really interesting arguments there. And one of the ones that I found particularly compelling was a guy who said, you talk about me not having commitment. Let me take you up to Kuratawhiri, Castle Hill, and I will show you a 6-metre high boulder. You wouldn't even know how to get off the ground on it. And when I'm 6 metres up and I'm doing some of the hardest moves in rock climbing that anybody can do in New Zealand, what's not committing about that? What's so glorious about walking up an endless snow slope, putting one foot in front of the other? How much coordination does that require? And you've also got the high objective dangers of avalanches, ice falls, rock falls, and who knows what else. Where is the skill in that? And I was like, oh, interesting point. So I think that answer lies in recreational trends are different now. And some of the things that I hold dear, for example, long wilderness trips, I love doing those. And the number of people doing those is decreasing. And I feel a bit sad about that. But I've also got to acknowledge that I'm also involved in a lot of time-deepening activities where I can get a short fix in the Port Hills just after the kids go to bed. Okay, so I have a conclusion here, and that is, I think I've shown some evidence that it is good for us as humans to get outdoors and experience nature. How we do that can happen in many different ways. It is important for us to plan ahead. And while I've talked pretty much exclusively about tramping in this context, I also would like to acknowledge that time deepening, if you're going for a short trip, there's actually quite high injury rates from the mountain bikers as well. It's important to let somebody know where you're going. Technology does offer us some great opportunities to be safer, get rescued more quickly, but it's a lot of the time it's the ambulance at the bottom of the hill. It's not actually stopping things going wrong, it's just allowing us to be rescued more efficiently. And I said right at the beginning, I said I was going to come back to Barrington. So I need to do that now. I asked, how might Barrington's adventure have played out today with the help of 150 years of technologies and techniques? Well, the answer is, it would depend on how they approached their trip. There's nothing stopping anyone in this room heading out with a gun, a blanket and a dog into the same country for 6 months. Nothing stopping you. Well, maybe just wait a few minutes, there's question time. So hold that. There's the same terrain there. But more likely is that Barrington and their group would have taken some communication device that was slightly better than a dog, and it might have involved a personal locator beacon or some kind of satellite device or a mountain radio. And if they were that miserable, they probably would have called for help and gotten out of there. So this would have robbed us of the wonderful journals that detailed their hardships. But the thing about epic adventures is that they're generally better experienced reading other people's journals than in that scary moment when you are out there living that epic. Alternatively, you could see us turning into a bunch of softies who run to mummy as soon as we run out of our Milo. Okay? So we call for help. We get help to get us out of there as quickly as possible. Quite frankly, there still is a lifetime of exploration within our country. We are fortunate to have the areas, both close to urban settings like the Port Hills that I talked about, but also the remoteness and ruggedness that Barrington and his group experienced 150 years ago. We do have the opportunity to get lost. We do have the opportunity to die out there. We need to make sure we do the basics well, but throw some technology in our pocket. Regardless of what we take with us, we'll ultimately still be reliant on ourselves and our resourcefulness and our courage to get us through when something bad happens. And I'd like to finish with a quote from Edward Abbey, who's an American writer who I quite enjoy. "A venturesome minority will always be eager to set off on their own, and no obstacles should be placed in their path. Let them take risks, for God's sake. Let them get lost, sunburnt, stranded, drowned, eaten by bears, buried alive under avalanches. That is the right and the privilege of any free person." Thank you.